Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. Happy birthday.
When dinner time had come and his mother called up to him, Toby came down the stairs and hesitantly sat down at the table across from his father, and in between his mother and an empty chair. It was quiet, as his parents picked at their food, but Toby refused to eat. Instead, he just watched his dad with a blank stare. His mother caught on to his stare and elbowed him slightly. Toby looked over at her slightly, and then down at his uneaten food, which he still didn't touch. Toby laid in bed. He pulled his covers over his head and stared at the window. He was tired, but there was no way he would fall asleep. He couldn't. There was just too much to think about. He had been debating on whether or not to follow his mother's directions and forgive his father, or continue holding a grudge with his boiling hatred. He heard his door creak open, and his mother padded into the room and sat on the bed next to him. She reached over and rubbed his back, which had been turned to her. "I know it's hard, Toby. Trust me. I understand. But I promise you, it will get better," she said softly. "When is he going to leave?" Toby said with an innocent tone in a shaky voice. Connie let her gaze fall down to her feet. "I don't know, honey. He's staying as far as I know," she replied. Toby didn't respond. He just continued to look forward at the wall, holding his damaged arm to his chest. After a few minutes of silence, his mother sighed before she leaned in to kiss his cheek and stood up to walk out of the room. "Good night," she said as she closed the door. The hours passed slowly, and Toby couldn't quit tossing and turning. Every time he let his imagination take over, he heard the screeching of tires, the screaming of his sister, and he would uncontrollably jerk in bed. He threw off his covers, and laying on his back, he pulled his pillow over his face and cried into it. He could hear his own pitiful weeping. He would have been screaming and crying if he didn't press his pillow over his face. After a few seconds, he threw the pillow off his face and sat up, hunched over, holding his head and breathing roughly. Tears streaming from his eyes, he couldn't help but cry. He tried to keep it in, but he couldn't stop the whining and whimpering as he sat there shaking. He inhaled before he stood up and walked around his bed to the window and peered out, taking in deep breaths. Trying to calm down, he rubbed his eyes and looked out at the group of tall pine trees across the street. He stopped suddenly, and his gaze slowly centered on something standing under the streetlight. He heard the ringing in his ears and couldn't look away. The figure stood beside the streetlight, about 2 feet shorter than it did. Long arms draped on its sides, and it stared up at him with non-existing eyes. The figure had no facial features to speak of, no eyes, no mouth, no nose. Yet it held Toby's hypnotized stare, seemingly peering into his very being. The ringing in his ears grew louder and louder with each second he stared before. Suddenly, it went all black. The next morning, Toby woke up in his bed. He felt different. He wasn't tired at all. And when he consciously woke up, it felt like he had been laying there, awake for hours. He had no thoughts flowing through his mind. He sat up and slowly stumbled over to the wall. But when he stood, he automatically felt dizzy. He stumbled to the doorway and walked downstairs. His parents were eating at the table. His father was turned in to the small TV and sat on the countertop. And his mother was reading the newspaper. She quickly looked over when she felt Toby's presence looming behind her. "Well, good morning, sleepyhead. You've been asleep forever." She greeted him with a hesitant smile. Toby slowly looked over at the clock and noticed that it was 12:30 p.m. "I made you breakfast, but it was cold. It got cold. I was going to wake you, but I felt you needed sleep." Her expression fell from happy to worried, as her son resisted responding to her.